Good morning, friends. Welcome to the early morning garden. You know, today it's going to be a really hot day. It's going to be the first day of our first heat wave of the summer here in Connecticut. And there's a lot of harvesting I want to get done first thing in the morning while it's still cool out. So I'm out here really early. I don't think my kids are actually even awake yet. So I'm hoping to get a little bit of harvesting done before breakfast. You know, we've harvested a little bit here and there, but there's a lot of food out here that might suffer a little bit with the heat wave, so it's time to harvest it now. So first of all, I want to harvest some strawberries. We have been harvesting strawberries for probably since the beginning of June, so a few weeks now, but the harvest is starting to die down a little bit, but there's still some in here that we need to get. I am actually not seeing as many strawberries in here as I saw last night. There were a lot last night I was kind of eyeing, thinking that they should be harvested first thing this morning. I am guessing that the strawberry patch has been getting raided a little bit here and there by some unidentified creature, you know, who, I mean, you can't really blame them for thinking strawberries are delicious because they are, but there are a few little gems in here we're gonna dig out and find. So look at this. I think I found where this creature has been eating. Look at all these strawberry tops that are scattered over in my asparagus patch. Tiny little strawberry, first harvest of the day. Well, friends, here is my huge strawberry harvest. So, you know, there weren't quite as many in there as I was hoping. That'll be a little tiny snack to go with breakfast, basically. Over here in the garlic patch, it's time to harvest some scapes. Now, I did already harvest quite a few of these scapes already, but at that time, there were a lot that were not ready yet. So now it's time to go back and get those. Scapes are one of my favorite early summer treats from the garden. I just did a whole video about garlic scapes recently, so I won't go into all of the detail about garlic scapes here. I will link that video in case you're interested in it. My favorite thing to do with these garlic scapes is to make garlic scape pesto. We're almost out of the first batch that I made about a few days to a week ago, so I think it's time to make a second batch. So today I'm going to harvest all of the rest of the scapes out here, and then we will see what we have to work with. So here's the rest of the 2024 scape harvest. More than enough to make another double batch of scape pesto for my family to enjoy. Another thing that I'm planning to harvest today is a little more of my medicinal herbs. Mostly today I'm just focusing on the flowers. So this is calendula. I like to harvest those pretty much as soon as they first start flowering. So for herbs today, I think I just have a little bit of calendula and some chamomile to harvest. Another thing I really want to get a serious harvest on today is some of this kale. I've got some here and then some more over in my main garden, so we'll harvest some from each patch. Now, what I like to do with kale when I'm harvesting it, especially this time of year, I like to harvest fairly large amounts of it, and then I like to freeze it for use all winter long. So I'll just cut off a leaf of kale, and then what I like to do, you see this center rib here, this is pretty stiff, pretty tough. So I like to strip all of the actual leaf off of it and use that. And then what I do with this kale is I just cram a lot of it into a freezer bag, just like a Ziploc freezer bag. And then I just put the leaves in whole aside from stripping out the main stem. And then whenever I want to add it to a soup or any kind of cooked dish like that, I just take some out and it falls apart really easily frozen. I just crumble it right into the soup or anything like that. It makes a great substitute for spinach as well in that type of application. So I want to get quite a bit of this harvested before the intense heat hits later today. So you can see I've got a few different kinds of kale here. This is dazzling blue lacinato kale. Over here, this is Russian red kale. And then I don't have as much in this patch, but this is blue curled Scotch kale. This is more like the familiar kale you'd usually see at the grocery store. But I like growing the variety of kales like this because it adds a variety of flavors and textures, and I think it just looks beautiful. Plus, growing multiple varieties of any vegetable like that, it's a little bit of insurance in case there's a certain variety that doesn't do as well one year. You have the other ones that might prefer slightly different growing conditions to pick up the slack. So, I'm actually rethinking things. I thought this was dazzling blue lacinato kale, but the white ribs makes me think that this is actually Savoy cabbage. This over here is Savoy cabbage, and these leaves are narrower, but they're wider than my actual dazzling blue kale here, which has the purple midrib. So I'm fairly new to growing Savoy cabbage, so I think I may have accidentally harvested a couple cabbage leaves along with my kale. But that will be no problem. They'll fit right in. So we've got quite a bit more kale and some other harvests too over in the main garden. So let's head on over there and harvest what we can. So we're gonna head straight to the back first. That is where my kale is, in this covered bed here. This is not ready to harvest yet, but it's starting to make heads. So it won't be too long before it's time to harvest broccoli. And the kale is all in here. So let's uncover this. So you can see over here lots of varieties of kale as well. Here's a beautiful cabbage that hopefully starts heading up soon. This is Swiss chard from last year that is going to seed. I'm just going to let it. But over here we have the same 3 types of kale. There's this Russian red, here's a dazzling blue lacinato kale, and right over here is a blue curled Scotch. This down here is a Savoy cabbage, which looks like it's just starting to form a really small head. I will make a point to not harvest that this time. So when I harvest kale, it's a little bit crowded in here so it's hard to see, but I like to take the outer and lower leaves first, because that allows the top of the kale plant, where the growth comes from, to continue producing more leaves. So take a look at this beautiful bouquet of kale. I know kale isn't, at least regular kale, isn't really thought of as an ornamental, but I think it's really pretty, especially when you have all these different varieties mixed together. Now over here in the kale bed, you can see I have all this sprouting broccoli. We've gotten 2 harvests off this broccoli already. And as you can see down there, it's starting to produce more shoots. So I'm hopeful that we'll get a few more harvests off of this broccoli here. This is my first year growing sprouting broccoli. It produces a little bit differently than the classic heading broccoli. With a heading broccoli, you're looking for that one main head, and then you harvest it. And depending on the variety, a lot of times you do get some side shoots after that too. But the sprouting broccoli, its main strength is the side shoots. So the initial head that I harvested, it was pretty small. It was really only a couple inches, and that's normal for sprouting broccoli. And then the second harvest I had was all side shoots, which gave me probably a greater harvest. I think the second harvest was bigger than the first one, where with, traditional heading broccoli, you get that big harvest, and that first harvest is your main harvest, and the side shoots are kind of a bonus after that. So as I said, this is my first year growing it. So far we've had 2 harvests from it. In order for it to be worth the space that I've allocated for it, I'm going to need a few more harvests. So I'll keep you updated about that as the season goes on and let you know how I like it. As far as flavor, it was delicious. So from that aspect, it's definitely worth growing. So here is one example of chamomile that I have scattered throughout the garden. So I'll be taking little harvests on all of these plants here and there. I just like to pop off these little flowers individually. And I'm going to add them right into the bowl along with our calendula. So chamomile is one of those little harvests. Depending on how you look at it, you could definitely say that it's a little bit tedious just to harvest each flower individually. And the plant tends to not yield a real lot on any given day, but it yields consistently day after day. So over the course of the season, I pull in, a respectable harvest of chamomile, and then I like to dry that and use that for tea all winter. So you could say it's a little tedious. I find it a little bit soothing, especially since, as I said, my plants don't harvest a ton each day. It's just a little bit here and there each day harvesting, and adds up to quite a bit at the end of the season. There is quite a bit of chamomile scattered throughout this garden, and then again on my deck in my container garden. So there will actually be a fair amount of chamomile that we're able to harvest today. Over here are my cherry tomatoes. You can see this chamomile has kind of sprawled into the walkway. And then if we look over here, more chamomile, and oh my goodness. We are not harvesting these, but I just wanted to take a minute to appreciate their beauty. Look at these poppies. So this is the Lauren's grape poppy variety. This is my first year growing it, and so far, gotta say it's stunning. This is actually the second, I don't really want to say flush of blooms, because I had one bloom that flowered individually a couple days ago. I will say the flower itself was very short-lived. It only lived for maybe a couple days, but it's so beautiful while it blooms that, I don't know, I'm thinking it might be a keeper. One thing I've also noticed about this specific poppy variety is look how upright it is. A lot of poppies will kind of sprawl, and unless you stake them, and I mean, I don't have time to stake poppies in my garden. I've got enough to do maintaining my vegetables. So I'm really enjoying that this one's upright. So after that little aside, let's get back to harvesting. I've got my snap peas growing along this fence here on both the inside and the outside of the garden. I want to get a decent harvest of these before it gets too hot today. Admittedly, peas have struggled a little bit in my garden this year. I mean, we've gotten enough to snack on and have as a little bit of a side dish for dinner. This is probably my fourth harvest or so of peas, not counting the ones that my kids just come out here and snack on during the day and eat. But normally we get significantly more peas than this. I think the pea plants themselves look a little bit sparser. So I think that the main issue was actually that we didn't have the greatest germination this year. I did use seeds left over from last year, but using one-year-old seeds shouldn't have been an issue. And I got quite a few to germinate. So I don't know if it's that combined with, it's not technically a heat wave. I think they consider it an official heat wave to be 3 days in a row above 90 degrees as the high. But early in the spring, we did have some hotter than usual weather. So I don't know. I'm hoping that didn't cause the peas to suffer. One thing I will say is the front of the garden over there, those peas were planted significantly earlier. We're over here on the side fence now. So these peas over here actually still have a lot of flowers on them. As you can see here, there's still a handful of flowers on some of these peas here, plus some little peas that aren't quite ready to harvest yet. So we will get more harvest, just not as much as I would prefer. But you can see down here, some of the leaves are getting a little bit crispy. This is a sign that these peas are not really happy with the temperature. You know, peas are a cold weather crop and tend to struggle a little bit when it gets warm. One of the biggest harvests that I'm really hoping to get done today is lettuce. You know, lettuce is pretty notorious for struggling in the heat. The lettuce is not going to like this heat wave that we have coming up. And I have lettuce in various places in my garden. Some of it has already started to bolt. This lettuce patch here is the first patch that I planted. And while, you know, it still looks pretty decent, you can see the center stalks on these lettuces, they're starting to send these up. That's a sign that they're bolting and starting to turn their harvest from leaf production into seed production. So this lettuce is pretty much done. To hopefully counteract the fact that lettuce bolts so easily, I've planted different patches of it throughout the garden. You can see I've got some of it mixed in here in between my broccoli plants, and then over on the side, You can't see it in this angle. I'll show you in a minute. I have another broccoli bed with lettuce planted in between those plants. And then in front of me, I have yet another lettuce bed. So out of the lettuce beds that have not bolted yet, I want to get a pretty significant harvest today. And then what I'm planning to do is to store this lettuce in a Ziploc bag in the refrigerator with a paper towel. I'll wash it off in my salad spinner. I'll wash it off and then spin it dry in the salad spinner until it has as little moisture as possible. Then I'm going to store it in a Ziploc baggie along with a paper towel. And that should keep at least a week in my refrigerator. So I'm planning to harvest at least a week's worth of lettuce today. You can see in here I have a variety of different lettuce varieties. Most of these are summer varieties that are supposed to be a little bit heat tolerant. Once we get past that initial coldness that we have in really early spring, from that point on I like to plant all heat tolerant varieties because my goal is to keep them going into summer as long as possible. So you can see over here this lettuce was planted a little bit later than the other lettuce patch I showed you. So a lot of this lettuce is still tender and not bolted yet. The goal is to harvest it before it bolts. So there are a variety of ways to grow and harvest lettuce. I like to grow mine very thickly together. As you can see, this is multiple lettuce plants. You can see this one looks like it's starting to bolt, but most of this lettuce still looks pretty good. And over here still looks pretty good as well. Then I like to harvest using the cut and come again method. That basically means that I'm just going to go down the row of lettuce and I'm going to cut all of the lettuce basically a couple inches from the ground. Leaving that couple inches behind is going to allow the plants to regrow, and I should be able to get a second, or depending on the time of year and the weather conditions, sometimes a third or fourth harvest off the same plants. So I don't allow them to grow into full-size heads before harvesting them. It just works better for me to harvest them as young, tender leaf lettuce. I find that they taste more delicious to me that way. I find that I get a really good variety that way, and for the way my family eats lettuce, I find that we get the most bang for our buck. We get the biggest harvest that way, so that's how I like to harvest it. So you can see I've got some volunteer tomato plants in here. I don't know where these came from. I didn't grow tomato plants in this bed last year, so we are not going to harvest those along with our lettuce. I'm just going to cut off little handfuls of lettuce and do it right here. So just by taking this lettuce and cutting it a few inches from the ground, I get this nice harvest of lettuce, and then I leave these little stubs of plants behind to hopefully continue growing. One of the reasons I grow this lettuce really thickly is because I like to use it as basically a living mulch. You know, I have these large broccoli plants here, and those broccoli plants really benefit from having the soil around their roots covered. They do a lot better. It suppresses weeds, it increases moisture retention, just leads for all around healthier plants. It helps kind of regulate the temperature of the soil. These plants are really large now, but when I first planted them, they were really small and there was a lot of bare space between them. So by filling in that bare space with a really quick growing crop like this lettuce, I'm able to make the most of the space and I'm able to maximize my harvest while benefiting both of my plants. You know, because the lettuce also benefits. Growing in the shade of the broccoli like this helps this lettuce to stay tender longer and helps it to go longer without bolting. I'm going to harvest some of this variety of lettuce as well. Just the same way as I harvested the other lettuce. So up here on the deck, you can see there's a lot more chamomile to harvest, and actually another calendula as well. So we'll harvest these and add them to our little bowl. So thank you so much for hanging out in the garden with me today as we got some harvesting done before the heat wave. I think we got a pretty decent harvest, so I'm looking forward to being able to enjoy this harvest over the next few days, and we're going to preserve some of it to last even longer. So I hope you're having a great day. I hope that you are enjoying your garden this year. I'd love to hear how the weather has been in your area, because I know all over the country and even all over the world we're experiencing very different weather at very different times of the year. So I'd love to hear what you've been harvesting from your garden already this year. I hope you're having a great day, and I can't wait to see you soon. I'll see you next time.